Welcome to the Captain's Table, the Forgotten Logs. I've spent the last few months gathering together all of the archives and records and character sheets and everything else I've got from all of my previous Star Trek campaigns, going back as far as 2004. And that's been fun and it's been interesting for me, but I thought there were some useful things I could give to other Star Trek GMs by taking a look at what happened in those previous campaigns. I'm not going to bore you going into every single little detail. I think that would be tedious and way more detail than is actually useful here. Instead, all I really want to do is give a quick summary of the adventure and then mention the lessons that I learned from running them. The very first one was titled Three-Sided Coin. And at the time, I thought I had sort of made that title up entirely on my own. It should make sense in the context of the story I'll explain in a second. I didn't realize until later that there's a song by the same name, nothing to do with me. The story, I can't remember why I made up my own, probably because in 2004 it was much harder to get hold of pre-written adventures. There just weren't that many around. The ones that were available for sale were very hard to get hold of, especially in South Africa. There's hardly anything imported to here. And the stuff that was online was a lot more limited than it is today, and I suppose probably because I was an inexperienced GM back then, I probably wasn't as good at quickly taking the core ideas from other people's adventures and making them into my own. Probably back then I would have thought that I needed to read through the entirety of what everybody else had written, and I now know that that's usually a waste of time. You skim through, you get the core parts of it, you figure out what's useful to you, you throw out the rest, and then you start fleshing it out according to your own needs. So I made up my own. And I think, even today, the basic idea of the story is not bad. It's basically a first contact scenario, but a triple first contact. So a Starfleet ship meeting with two different unknown aliens, all converging together on the same planet at the same time for the first time ever. I can't really remember my own GMing evolution very well. I think this is the sort of adventure that I would definitely like to run these days, because it's very open-ended. There's a lot of room for improvisation, as I've explained in my previous videos. And there's a lot of space for the players to figure out for themselves what path they would like to take, but also a lot of room for the GM to bounce off of what the players are doing. The GM is not very constrained in this. So, a little more detail. I decided that I was going to make this an Enterprise era game. This was pretty unusual at the time. A recent poll conducted on the Star Trek Adventures Facebook group pretty much confirms that Enterprise era is still not very widely used. And I think I've only ever really seen 3, maybe 4 other people running games in that era. But 2004, we knew very little about the setting. I think, if I remember right, they hadn't even gotten to season 4 yet, so lots of stuff still wasn't known. And in particular, they had kind of set up that there were going to be other ships of the NX class, but they hadn't yet named the first one as Columbia NX-02. So I knew there was going to be an NX-02. I decided that was going to be the ship I was going to use for this game. And they had also mentioned the name Intrepid as another Starfleet ship a few times in the series. I quite like that name. There's lots of other interesting associations with the name Intrepid, so I made my ship the Intrepid NX-02. And within a few months of this, I think this game we probably ran it around about March, maybe April of 2004. So it wasn't too much longer until that had been overridden with Columbia. Then I also pre-generated some player characters. I took the Enterprise crew as a starting template and modified a bit from there. There was a Vulcan character, I can't remember what role the Vulcan was in. Possibly the Doctor, although I'm not certain of that. And there was also an Andorian character on board. So, you know, clearly I was going for a little bit more variety than Enterprise itself did. Otherwise, I can't really remember too much about how the characters played out. Obviously, anytime you're using pre-generated characters, especially if it's only a once-off, the players are unlikely to get very deeply into character. And that was true in this game as well. I can't even remember for absolute certain which players were in this game. I've got a rough idea of who it might have been, but none of them can remember for sure that far back either, so we may never have an exact list of players. But I don't remember any particularly important character moments where this really wasn't a character-driven adventure. The aliens that they got to encounter, the first one were a pretty simple sort of a scavenger, well, scavenger I suppose is the right word there, engineering scavenger type group called the Twiddy. No idea where I got the name from. And in hindsight, they're kind of similar to the, what are they called? The Pack-Led, similar to the Pack-Led. Not as obviously stupid, but definitely not comfortable or able to, with developing their own starships entirely from scratch. And I think the main inspiration I had for this was a little very basic attempt at photoshopping that I had tried around, you know, at that time. I guess probably 2002-ish, 2003-ish, I can't remember for sure now, where I just took a bunch of pictures I had of different Canon starships and chopped and changed them a bit, and, you know, took pieces off of one and stuck them on the other, and made this really messy, mangled hybrid ship. And that was the Twiddy Raider. Then the other species were the King Tang, and they were more or less insectoids, sort of ant-like is I think how I described them, but really, really big, much, much larger than a human. And with a very strange language. I wanted them to be especially alien, not at all typical Star Trek stuff. The Twiddy, they were the typical humanoids. They were, you know, easy for the casting departments to just slap on some head makeup or something. But the King Tang were supposed to be weirdly, weirdly alien. And this is something that I've tried a few times over the years, is to make something as alien as possible. And that has its advantages and disadvantages. I think the disadvantage in this game is that it's kind of better to make your very alien aliens more reactive than active. If they have a set plan and they're going out and they're doing whatever it is that they want to do, then the players can, just by observation, work out their actions, work out their motives, you know, get an idea of how they work. You want them to be strange and mysterious, you have them sitting there doing nothing, waiting to see what the players do. And when the player characters do something, they react, and they maybe react in weird ways that are then much harder for the players to work out. So you can do interesting stuff with that, but it's tricky in a game where everybody's waiting for everybody else to do something to have them as one of the components in the system. Obviously, the player characters, they want to, you know, do this first contact. They've got an idea of what the mission is, but they don't want to take too big risks. They don't want to piss anybody off or anything like that. And then the Twitty, I can't remember for absolute certain, but I'm pretty sure I had them as some sort of thief characters. They were there to steal technology to add to their ship. I really don't think I had seen the episode that has the Packlet in it of TNG. If I had, then I probably saw it when I was really, really young. So maybe it made some impression on me, but I don't think I stole the idea from them. But coincidentally, it is pretty similar to them. I'm sure I stole it from somewhere. It's not a very original idea, but I think it's just coincidence that they're pack-led similar. Yeah, so that was the basic setup. The year was 2155, so not too far off from when Enterprise did actually eventually launch its NX-02. Yeah, the adventure itself played out fairly tamely. The Twitty tried to steal something, there was a chase scene, probably nothing too bad happened in the end. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, I think the main things I learned from that episode were that I can get away with making things up on the fly, particularly NPC motivations. NPC motivations, you can have a rough idea of basically how they think, but in an unknown situation where every side is playing off of every other side and it's a more complicated dynamic, you can't pre-script that sort of thing. You have to make it up on your own there and then. And the interesting thing that I intended with the design of this episode was that I'd have to be bouncing off of my own ideas as well as what the players were doing. So deciding what the Twitty do would rely on what the King Tang did, and what the King Tang did relied on what the Twitty did as well. Otherwise, I don't think it was a particularly memorable game. Didn't really introduce the players to the rule system very well because I didn't know the rule system that well back then. I'm almost certain this was the last Unicorn rules. And yeah, it was not really intended as a long-term campaign. It was just a once-off so that I could get a feel for it. And I think for that purpose, it basically worked.